Switched on IT is proudly brought to you by Oz Hosting, Cloud Made Easy.
Welcome to Switched on IT. I'm Barry. This is the show where we talk about everything IT. In last week's show, you may remember we talked about pillar and cluster content. Now, at the end of that show, Ray said that this week we would have a look at how to create the content for the pillar and cluster process. So that's what we are going to have a look at today. And Doug and Ray are with us today. Welcome, Doug Endersby.
Thanks, Barry.
And welcome, Ray Sidney Smith from the USA.
Hello there.
Doug, let me just throw this over to you and get you to introduce us to this topic, please.
Sure. So, Barry, as you were saying last week, it was a discussion around pillar and cluster content. So that was part of your SEO marketing strategy. And we talked about using pillar and cluster content across 3 different channels of communication. We talked about having a blog, having podcasts, having video content, and that then leads us very nicely into the challenge of actually creating the content. So clearly you need to plan this out. You need to think of the long term, probably think of what's going to happen in the next year, and then break it down into meaningful periods of time for that, and then start to apply your publishing strategy over the course of the year. And then you're going to have, you should theoretically have no surprises in terms of content gaps. But of course, it is a creative process. It's helpful if you've got some guidelines or some rules of thumb. And as we always know, Ray has plenty of those useful tips and hints. So Ray, initially, let's maybe take a dive into setting up a calendar, I guess, of events. What are the, if you like, the ABCs that you would suggest to us for creating a proper publishing program for a year?
Yeah, sure. So if we want to contextualize this, whether or not it's the hub and spoke or pillar and cluster content analogy that we used, that strategy is one of many different strategies for SEO purposes. And what I talked about at the end of last week was really around the notion of content creation generally. How do you implement any of these strategies once you do come across them? And as you noted, Doug, I think the first thing that most people need to do is kind of step up to the gestalt of what you're dealing with, which really requires an understanding of the timeline. And for most of us on planet Earth, we have 365 days, and so it's very easy for us to work on an annualized planning basis. So I do actually recommend that everyone actually set themselves up for a full year's worth of understanding what type of content they're going to be doing. Why do I do that? Because if you can't commit to 12 months worth of posting, then why do 4 weeks of it? Why do 5 weeks of it? It's really not going to be useful to the business to have 4 or 5 posts and then for you to peter out. So whether you're doing text, audio, or video content, you really want to say, okay, here goes a year's worth of content, and this is what we're going to do, just high level. You don't have to get into the weeds necessarily, but just deciding on a couple things. One, you could decide on a theme. So for example, for W3 Consulting, we do digital marketing and productivity technology consulting. So we may say, this year we're going to focus on productivity technology that helps with small businesses who are in and trying to reopen their retail environments because of the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So we could then say that's going to be our theme, is basically the recovery process. How do we stay productive on the road to recovery? That could be a really good theme, and throughout the year, we can then start to place chunks of our content into what I call seasons. We have 4 natural seasons throughout the year, and any other groupings of time. So if you're a wedding photographer, for example, the summer season is going to be a natural busy time for you. And if you are an accountant, tax season is going to be a busy time for you. Those are seasons. So it doesn't have to fit the natural seasons to be a season. So we go from that point of identifying the thematic calendar, identifying what the, in essence, seasons are, or periods of time that are kind of chunks, and then we can define whether or not we're creating daily, weekly, or monthly content for those various channels. So you might say, we're going to tweet 4 times a day on Twitter, but we're only going to write 1 blog post a week on our blog, or we're going to have 1 podcast episode, or we're going to do 1 video per month, and that video is going to be repurposed onto the blog, right? So we start at a high level with the calendar, and then we keep staging it down from seasons down to our granular content. You can use any number of tools. You can use a calendar, you can use a paper calendar or a paper diary or agenda for this. You can do it in any number of ways to create your thematic calendar. Questions, Doug, for me, and other comments you might have on creating the thematic calendar?
Okay. Well, you talked about, as an example, a type of business being an accounting practice. So I thought, well, why don't we actually have a look at that and sort of loosely define a thematic calendar for an accounting practice, and toss around maybe some examples of creating content for a publishing program for an accounting practice. So, thinking about an accounting practice, you're right that you're going to have tax time. But there's corporate tax, there's personal tax, there's also your different sort of goods and services tax that might apply to an organisation, and then perhaps you've got the other events that happen in people's lives where they're looking at what's happening with their retirement funds, their 401k, the taxation structure of that, whether they're buying and selling any property or any assets in the business. And I guess there's a bunch of things that you could then start to sort of, and I don't really want to dig in too deeply into what it's like being an accounting practice, but I think it's just useful, some useful examples where we can then say, okay, well, here are some sort of some different ideas that we could then say, all right, well, how do we develop into those ideas? What is the sort of the procedure that we might step through to organise some kind of a publishing program for our little practice like that. And whether it's an accounting practice or a legal practice or any sort of professional services, it's going to be exactly the same process and probably applicable well beyond that.
Yeah, and so you bring up a really great point. So just as by way of example, in the accounting practice, most accountants are, if you're a chartered accountant in your side of the world or CPA in my side of the world, we tend to think about things from a tax season perspective. Many times, business advisory, forensic accountants are looking for forensic consulting, clients. So it depends on the type of accounting practice you have and what you're really looking for. But generally, you're looking for a variety of different things to fill in different parts of your year. You're going to have high peaks of the year. And this is really where, for an accountant, this is probably very easy to think about. But for the rest of us who are regular business owners, we don't necessarily think about this. But if you are an existing business, a going concern, and you've been in business for a while, I always say look at your actual sales and revenue reports. And if you look at those revenue reports, you'll see peaks for particular service lines or product lines in the business. And those are actually really useful for you to know what type of content to produce for your social media or for other kinds of content strategy, right? So say, for example, let's take the wedding photographer business, for example. I'm sorry, let's stay with the accounting. So in the accounting practice, the accountant knows that tax season's coming. And in the United States, I'm going to use U.S. and you can correct me for times in Australia. But in the United States, April tax deadline, April 15th is our tax deadline. And so in and leading up to that time frame, accountants are very, very busy. But what's really important is that, say, in October, November, December, they're actually generating content for that season so that come January 1st, they have content going out that is pre-scheduled, so that people know that they're available to do that kind of work. The sales cycle, right? When a person first comes into contact with the business until the point in which they purchase is the sales cycle. And we need to figure out where along that pipeline, where along that funnel, people are coming into contact with your content. So we can start to kind of create a calendar for when that content will go out, such that people will see it at the time they have the felt need or want. So we want to think about this from when in the sales and revenue cycles of the business throughout the year, the right content is placed at the right time. So you might then decide right after April 15th, which in America is our, tax accountants are all going on vacation for the next couple weeks after the tax season deadline comes. Then when they get back, then they may decide to start a season of business advisory marketing. So they're going to put out content around business advisory services for those small businesses and mid-sized businesses that they may cater to at that time, right? Because now those businesses have filed their tax returns, they're feeling all of the pain of having just shelled out taxes, and they've paid their tax bills, and now they're looking for shoring up their business and making sure that they can stay solvent for the next quarter, next 2 quarters, the next year. And that's where a good accountant can come in and provide those business advisory services. So that's how we're thinking about the thematic calendar. Every business should be doing this work to make sure that they know what the arc of their year is going to look like in terms of content creation. Because if you fail to plan, you've planned to fail, right? So you really need to be able to set yourself up for your business to be able to know what content it's creating on that level.
Terrific. So we've looked at our revenue numbers and defined over the course of the year, where the peaks and troughs are for different service lines, and that's informed us in terms of, given us a sense of when it might be appropriate to produce particular types of content. And then we have to sit round the table and somehow, if I'm the I guess the senior partner in a professional services firm, I'm going to need to have, I guess, a bunch of people support me, help me in then developing, the actual content itself. And you mentioned a great acronym before, and how we all love acronyms. Just to give us a bit of a checklist, can you take us through, what that process is, and how you'd recommend that gets organised in a small business?
Sure. So my first set of acronyms are the ABCs. And the ABCs are kind of the next stage from that, which is to say that there needs to be infrastructure in place beyond just the thematic calendar for you to be able to know what your editorial schedule is going to look like. So you start with an editorial schedule, you flesh out all those pieces, and then you determine what are the ABCs of creating content. And the ABCs are always be commenting. And that means that you're actually going out there and you're looking at content that is being produced in your industry, in your field, in your area, whatever it might be, and you are engaging with the audiences around you. You can't build a community from nothing. So you need to go out there and contribute to other communities in order to bring people over to your side. It's kind of like Star Wars, the Jedis and the dark side. But it's all good though. So you have to actually think about how you are going out there, engaging with other communities to start getting your recognition out there. So always be commenting. Every day you should think about a few sites that you follow where your audience already exists. You know the audience you want to bring toward you, and you go out there and you start commenting on them. That's going to start creating back and forth conversations where you're just going in there and contributing to someone else's space, someone else's community, and some level of those people are going to bleed over and become your followers, your readers, viewers, listeners. Then there's a second part of ABCs. Always be creating. And what I mean by that is that there's 2 layers of creating. There is consistent creation of content, you generating content. And that's important. We're going to get to my next acronym in that space. But more importantly is the always be capturing part, which is to say that in my business, I'm interacting with clients every day. There's all kinds of things happening in your business where you have a lot of activity happening. They may not be income producing activities, but they are actually content opportunities. So say, for example, Doug calls me up and says, hey, by the way, I need to have a conversation about our marketing strategy. I'd really like to get a control on this stuff. And I say, sure. And we sit down and he talks to me about some gnarly problem he's having with his content strategy. And I sit and I say, okay, let's flesh out the problem. And I solve the problem with Doug and that problem. Well, guess what? All I need to do is take 15 minutes after I've talked to Doug and this gnarly problem and either record audio, scratch on paper, put myself on camera and record video of what our conversation was about and how I solved the problem. Because I may not have a blog post today, maybe not this week, maybe not even this quarter, about what we talked about, but at some point, that content is going to be useful to me. That I solved this problem for a client and I worked through dealing with that problem and what the outcome was. So we always want to be generating from the perspective of what can we capture. This includes, like I said, audio, video, photographs. You go to an event, it's really helpful to just grab your phone and just take some B-roll. B-roll is basically a video that is kind of used in the background behind, when you put up an image with letters on camera. People want to just have some kind of moving visual that's associated with transitions in videos, all those kinds of things. And if you're hosting an event or you're attending an event, just taking some B-roll of the event can be very useful to you. Making sure you get people's permissions and whatnot as necessary. But making sure that you're getting this kind of content means you're always capturing. Always be thinking, can I be capturing this right now? Should I take a picture of this this new project that we're working on? We're working on this new piece. Should I take a screenshot of this thing? And what you do is then you centralize all of this content that you're capturing throughout time, and then you can start to organize it, right? You can say, okay, these are all the screenshots of things that were in process, and these are all audio clips of problems that I solved with a client, or even recorded audio sessions with those clients. You're not sharing them with the public, but they're just there as notes. You can even put them through a tool to transcribe the audio so you can go back and review the notes later. After every major meeting you have with a client, you throw up the webcam and you just record locally on your computer, you talking to the camera and explaining what it is that you solved. You don't have to mention a client's name. You don't have to mention any specific details that lead back to the client. You're just doing it for being able to capture, to generate that content. Because the reality is that 5 minutes, that 10 minutes that you take after the meeting means that that's 10 minutes, 5 minutes saved of now 6 months down the road thinking, oh gosh, you know what? I had this really great idea for this blog post, and how do I open it? Well, guess what? You can pull up the recording and literally take exactly what you said when you were primed to think about that topic at that time. So always be capturing. If you're capturing well, if you're commenting, if you're creating on the regular, then when you get to the point of the next stage, you are now going to be poised to actually have a lot of that content created. I usually sit down and usually about 80% of the time, I have 80% of the content already created for me because I've captured it in some way, shape, or form. And all I have to do now is to assemble the parts. I've got to take a little bit from here, a little bit from there, and combine those pieces because I've written a paragraph about a topic on the subject 6 months ago, and now I've written about another 40% a couple of weeks ago, and now I have 60%, whatever the number is, created, and all I have to do now is finish adding in that extra additional percentage of content and then do some cleanup, right? So we're really thinking about this from an ongoing process of capturing such that the amount you capture then can start to equal the amount of content that you want to produce on the other side.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Now, that makes sense. And I think that there is something we were talking about before that is sort of in the middle there. So, because we talked about the thematic calendar, and that's what we're going to create. And what we're sort of talking about here is, in a little bit of a sense, an opportunistic process where, as events happen, you go, well, I'm going to record that because I can see that should sit in the library because it's got the right kind of information in it that's going to be suiting my calendar. But then there's the collaborative process of sitting down with some other folks in the business, hopefully, and basically laying out your publishing program for the year. And I think you used I think we were talking before about having a brainstorming session, and then there were some other events that might happen after that. And I thought that was quite a good structured approach, taking us from our SEO, search engine strategy, to, let's put a lot more detail behind the publishing program from a content perspective, and then of course in the course of the year, we'll always be creating, always be capturing, and that will fill in a lot of the publishing slots that we've defined that we're going to have in our publishing program. So I just wanted to sort of maybe touch on the maybe starting with the brainstorming process, but how you see that little bit in the middle where we've gone from our search engine optimization strategy into the sort of the development of the themed calendar.
If you've lost your income or had a change of earning capacity through no fault of your own and are struggling with debt that you can no longer handle, you probably feel a bit like this ant. If the struggle is getting you down and you feel overwhelmed, there is an answer. Central Liaison has helped thousands of people break free of the debt struggle by handling their debt for them. Freeze all interest, stop the harassing calls from the bank and start enjoying life again. Call them today on 0409 344 070 for a confidential, obligation-free chat about how Central Liaison can help you take your life back. The number again, 0409 344 070. Call them now.
Oz Hosting is proud to support Switched On IT in bringing practical help to Australian businesses. We're talking to literally hundreds of businesses every day about their IT services, how to make them more efficient, how to make their businesses more efficient, and how to protect their valuable data. If you'd like your IT services securely hosted right here in Australia and expertly managed, talk to Oz Hosting.
Power FM is total entertainment. From the morning drive with Fiona and Jeff to the drive home with Jeff Black. On the weekends, catch the Crazy Kevin Show, Dennis Mitchell's Breakfast with the Beatles, the Semi-Pro Sports Show, and Racing Nation with James O'Shea, plus the music you grew up with. Keep your radio dial locked on Toowoomba's Power FM, celebrating 10 years. You'll find us at 88.0 on the FM dial or online at www.powerfmradio.com.au.
Mind, Body, Soul with Perth-based international speaker and influencer Gwenda Smith. Every week we explore the world of business and personal development with an exciting new format with some of the world's leading experts on productivity, mindfulness, sales success, personal development and more every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Only on ptvchannel0.com or the PTV Channel O app. PTV Channel O. Discover a whole new world of entertainment.
You're absolutely right, Doug, and that is kind of the medium ground that the people where the ABCs don't work for them because for whatever reason they are resistant to it, then I use the brooded method. Brooded stands for a formula for thinking about how to structure content. We start off with brainstorming, as you noted. Then we go into research, organize, outline, and organizing and outline typically happen hand in hand. Then we go to drafting. If it's audio or video, you can just swap that out for recording. And then we go to editing and disseminating. So let's break these pieces apart into how you would do all of this. So you have your thematic calendar, you have your seasons or periods of the year, and then you have your individual posting schedule. That's all happening in a thematic calendar. But at some point, you have to decide on what the individual topics are going to be for the year. And so when you get to that individual topics part of the thematic calendar, that's where brainstorming really starts. So you may do that brainstorming just a few times a year. You may do that once a month for the various individual topics. It depends on your business and your needs. Say for an accountant, the same general seasonal calendar is going to happen every year. So you can pretty much do your brainstorming in large chunks, probably quarterly or every half yearly. Then we go to researching. Researching is necessary for some people. Like, for example, almost every topic I write for, I have to do some level of research. And it's just because, I'm going to need to know specific, numbers. I'm going to need to know statistics. I'm going to need to know exact definitions of things. And so I just want to get all of those underlying details outlined for myself and put into a repository with whatever content I'm going to be providing. So if I'm going to be recording a video, I want to make sure that I have all the visuals. So I'm going to research those visuals, get them together, work with the designer to get those pieces together so they look good, and then I put those into the folder with my content. Then we get to the organize and outline phase. If we're talking about written content, it makes a lot of sense, right? Just like in high school English class, or secondary school English class, you have a period where you take your research, you take your brainstorming and your research, you then organize that into an appropriate, this is stuff that I'm going to use, this is stuff I'm not going to use, and so you throw this into the rubbish, this stuff is going to go into the pile that is for me to use, and then I'm going to outline the paper, right? What's the introduction, what's point 1, point 2, point 3, and then what's my closing. The same thing applies in video. If you're going to do a podcast recording or a video recording, how are you going to open up the video? How are you going to hook people in audio? You're going to organize and outline your episode or your video, show, no matter what. So you organize and outline. We then get to the stage of drafting. Drafting is that point where you actually are generating. So in the always be creating place, I'm encouraging folks to always be creating by always capturing when things come to pass. In the brooded phase, drafting happens on some kind of schedule. So you may decide every Thursday morning for 2 hours, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to draft. That could be writing, it could be recording, audio or video, right? And so you have a set time frame where you're going to just do that activity every week. You put on your creation hat and you just go to drafting, go to recording, and do that work. Then we come back with editing. That's, again, a scheduled activity. I usually recommend that people don't try to draft and edit sequentially, because sometimes you're just too close to the material, right? If you record a podcast today and then you go directly into editing it, that might be helpful because you remember most of the pieces. But, if you do the editing tomorrow, you've had a little bit of emotional distance from that particular recording or that piece of that blog article that you're writing. And then you can sit down and do the editing and get it into its final state. After it's edited, it is in its final kind of redacted form. And now you're ready to what I call disseminate. Disseminating is scheduling it to publish, getting all of the requisite promotional materials together, all the creatives prepared, and then both publishing it and promoting it. So dissemination is the publishing and promotion process that fits within that stage. And so if you take it from brainstorm, research, organize, outline, draft, edit, and disseminate, you now have this very strategic view of how things move through the channel so that you can get a clear view on what you need to get done for every piece of content that you create. And then you can determine how much time does that take. Does it take me 2 hours to go from the research to the disseminate stage? And if that's right, do I have 2 hours in my week to produce a weekly piece of content? Or do I have 4 hours, which means I can put out 2 pieces of content every week? You determine the schedule based on how much work you can actually get done, or whether you need to outsource that to someone else, hire someone to take on some of those duties to be able to reduce your workload so that you can output the right amount of content for the business.
Right. Okay. So I think that gives our listeners and our viewers a terrific roadmap to respond to the content creation needs that we outlined in the whole search engine optimization strategy that we talked about last week. Is there, I think that's just a comprehensive program there. I don't honestly have any other questions. I don't know, Barry, if there's anything that you'd like Ray to comment on this process.
As I've been listening to you, one of the things I noticed, Ray, is that you have made a comment about time. Are there programs out there? Is there some kind of automation that people can look at to help this process along?
Do you mean by being able to pre-schedule posts, or do you mean by being able to organize their time better?
Both. Because if there's some way that, and I'm thinking particularly of the kinds of processes that you and I have been putting in place to organise the posting for PTV Channel O, effectively what that has done for the station is that I now, because I have a process that I follow and something that automates that, my time is much better organised.
Yeah, so I think that's about process. So one is kind of the making time for content is very different than setting up process for the content creation, and so it's just going to be determined by the type of business. But I think that every business should outline. So, for example, I run several podcasts, and some would say too many, and I actually have every podcast post-production checklist identified with links to everything and exactly what it is that every single episode needs to do. And that way, each person who's involved takes care of those parts. And they're identified by color and their name and all kinds of fun stuff. But what it gives us is a clear roadmap for every piece of content we want to publish for this. What are all the places and parts that we need to get to be able to get it together to get out the door? And that's what you've done at PTV Channel O, and I think that everyone should do. So once you get to that place of understanding, okay, are we going to follow the ABC rule? Are we going to follow the brooded method? Then you can say, okay, what are the parts? Like, what are the literal individual steps from taking us from A to Z? And then you know what are the tools we need to have in order to satisfy those parts. We can talk a little bit about that in a moment. But we also know who handles what and when they handle it. Okay, so within a 2-hour time frame, I'm going to be able to take this episode from raw audio for the podcast, and I'm going to get it to a final edit. And so that's going to be the mastered file. I'm going to publish that, and we're good to go. Then I'm going to hand that over to our next person who's going to be able to get the transcription done. Go ahead and edit the transcription and make sure there's nothing really crazy that is said in the machine-generated transcription. Then we're going to set up the blog post that's going to hold the podcast episode. We're going to upload it to the podcast media host. All of those pieces are individually outlined and who is actually going to handle them. And then we get to the end. And we know now exactly how much time each episode is going to take, minus, when there are hiccups, maybe, something happened with the raw audio, so there needs to be some correction there. And what you then start to see is this well-oiled machine that can really start to pump out a lot more content than if every time you sit down to do content, you are recreating the process. You're determining which workflows are working and which ones aren't. Then we go forward and we can see that we can actually edit a lot. We can automate a lot of these pieces. You can automate them through tools like Hootsuite. I guess not disclosure, but I'm one of the Hootsuite global brand ambassadors. So obviously I love Hootsuite. There are many other social media scheduling tools that are out there. And actually, more important to that is that many of the platforms now have native scheduling. So you can go to Facebook and you can actually schedule a post to go out at a date and time that you choose. Twitter is rolling that out on the web platform. And so more and more you're seeing that you can go into the Facebook Creator Studio and schedule an Instagram post and schedule a Facebook page post for a date and time in the future, which means you're not relegated to having to post in real time. You can plan out maybe 5-6 weeks of content ahead of schedule, create that content, and then schedule it and be working on the next 4, 5, 6 weeks worth of content. So you're running in this rolling schedule while being still mindful. Say January you were going to talk about having big parties in March and April, right? Scheduling that out means that you should be paying attention to that when the COVID-19 pandemic starts to roil through the globe. You don't have posts that are going to be inappropriate to the time frame in which you're posting. So with automation comes responsibility to pay attention to what you're posting. But you can, in normal times, you're able to schedule out a bit so that you have a little bit of time. Go to the kids' soccer game when that happens again, when you can have a chance to go ahead and live your life while still getting content out on a regular scheduled basis.
Yeah, and if you're using YouTube does the same thing. You can schedule your post in YouTube as well. So
exactly.
So and we're doing a lot of that sort of thing now at PTV Channel O as well. And the other thing that we do is that, and I presume that Hootsuite allows you to do this too, is that you can actually schedule a generic post to go out. So if you have something happening, say, on the 1st of every month, that it happens every month at the same time, you can actually schedule a generic post that will go out on the first day of the month every month without you having to do anything else, correct?
Yeah, so you can schedule a post. You can actually do a bulk import of a post. I don't know if you can do a recurring post that just keeps happening over and over again, but you can upload a CSV of a what they call a bulk import and do that for an extended period of time. So you'd only have to do that, once or twice a year if you're doing that each time, every week at the same time kind of thing. Or you could use other services that will actually post, like IFT or Zapier can be set up to post the same content on a recurring basis outside of the need for something like Hootsuite to do it for you. But yeah, you have all kinds of tools that can do those kinds of recurring posts.
Yeah. Terrific. All right. Any final words on this topic, Doug?
That's it from me.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time today. We will pick this up and have a look at another topic next week. Until then, stay COVID safe, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Barry.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye. You've been watching Switched on IT. Today, Doug and Ray have been doing a follow-up session on last week's show when they talked about pillar and cluster content. If you missed that show and you want to see what they said, each of our shows is on video on demand. You can go back, you can have a look at any of those shows. If you've got any questions that you'd like to ask Doug or Ray, send us an email. The address is on the screen now. It's feedback@ptvchannelo.com, or you can contact us on our contact page on the website. If there's something that if there's a topic that you would like Doug and Ray to cover for you, send us that as well. Lots of our stories on PTV come from you, the viewers, so be sure to let us know if there's something that's pressing or something that you would like to know about. Send us an email or a contact, and we'll pass that on to Doug and Ray and get them to cover it for you. Also, remember that you can contact us on our social media. All of the social media addresses are there for you on the screen, and we will look forward to seeing you again next week on PTV Channel O when we have another session of Switched on IT. For now, take care, and we'll see you next week.
Oz Hosting is proud to support Switched on IT in bringing practical help to Australian businesses. We're talking to literally hundreds of businesses every day about their IT services, how to make them more efficient, how to make their businesses more efficient, and how to protect their valuable data. If you'd like your IT services securely hosted right here in Australia and expertly managed, talk to Oz Hosting.
When the going gets tough, advertising is a must. Thousands of potential customers make buying decisions every day based on advertising they've seen or heard on radio and television. Are you losing sales because potential customers don't know what you offer? Get your business, product or service in front of thousands of potential customers with a joint advertising package on Power FM and PTV Channel O. Capture a multimedia audience with our affordable radio, TV media advertising package. Stay ahead of the pack by contacting Barry on 0431 390 920 or email feedback@ptvchannelo.com or Jeff@powerfmtoowoomba@gmail.com.